Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram Om. 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 Om Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Hari Om to everybody. Yesterday we were sharing that ultimately the watcher and watched should become one. Because in our pursuit to become aware of the watcher, we forget that the watcher has been with us. It is very difficult for our intellect to conceive that state. But when we go through Papa's words, expressions, we might get some clue towards that. We will now read out the foreword written by one Lance E. Nelson to the foreign edition of In the Vision of God in 90s. This is the final volume in Swami Ramdas's autobiographical trilogy. There are 2 volumes of this. In the Vision of God, there were 2 volumes. First volume was there is a forward, and second volume is there is the forward we are now reading it out. Ramdas is led from his home state of Kerala to Rishikesh, a pilgrimage center in the foothills of the Himalayas and beyond. He journeys to the beautiful Vale of Kashmir, then back via Bombay to North Kerala, where his devotees start an ashram for him, and he meets Mother Krishnabai, his most eminent disciple, in Kasaragod ashram. As they journey with Ramdas, I would ask readers to keep in mind his title for the volume, noting well that the word vision has been substituted for the quest. Ramdas's first book was In Quest of God. This may seem too obvious, but it is worthwhile mentioning because the deceptive simplicity of Ramdas's style. That is how they describe, It is not deceptive, but there is a flowery word. Papa doesn't do anything like that. Because the deceptive simplicity of Ramdas's style may allow us to forget the significance of what he describes. Because he behaves like ordinary people, he laughs, he does. That is called deceptive, Though he has reached the highest. Here we have an account of a human being who was directly and vividly aware of the absolute non-duality of God and the world. As he travelled, he experienced everything as identical with and transparent to the blissful infinite. As he travelled, he experienced everything as identical with and transparent to the blissful infinite. So never it was from the individual level. This vision, universal vision we can call it. This vision, Ramdas said, dated from the time of the great mystical awakening he had in the caves in Mangalore, described in the early pages of the volume number 1. Having attained constant awareness of self as the divine, capital S, a state called Sahaj Samadhi, Swami Ramdas could no longer say I. He began referring to himself as Ramdas in the third person. Having attained constant awareness of self as the divine, a state called Sahaj Samadhi, Swami Ramdas could no longer say I. He began referring to himself as Ramdas in the third person. Later during the days, Ramdas lived a more settled life in Anandashram. He was asked why he no longer repeated Ramnam. It is very important. That's why we were prompted to read this. Yesterday, the watcher and the watched. We cannot separate the watcher from the watched. We cannot conceive, our intellect cannot conceive. But here is some idea. After all, this was later during the days Ramdas lived a more settled life in Anandashram. He was asked why he no longer repeated Ramnam, the holy name of God. After all, this was the spiritual practice that had lifted him to the heights of God realization. He responded, who is there to repeat it? He who used to repeat it has ceased to exist, having become one with Ram. Reflecting on the Himalayan journeys described in the present volume, Ramdas described his experience. He felt the oneness of the Spirit everywhere, and there was nothing beside himself. Everything was a manifestation of his own self, capital S. While he was seeing the divine self as pervading every particle of the universe, he experienced simultaneously the same infinite as a personal God, his beloved Ram. speaking to him, guiding him in an utterly personal way. Thus we have in this book, as was mentioned in the foreword to volume number 1, a most extraordinary play of non-dualism and devotion, Advaita and Bhakti, documented in a most intimate and authentic manner. Readers will be transfixed, for example, by a remarkable episode in Ramdas's Himalayan pilgrimage. Descending a mountain slope in serious and imminent danger of losing his footing and plunging to his death in the jar below, Ramdas carries on a conversation with Ram, who advises him at every step which way to go, which way not to go, so as to avoid a disaster. Episodes like this, in which Ramdas reveals more directly the nature of his experience, are important. True, he describes this experience, as he does many others, with an innocence and understatement that may cause us to miss its significance. All the more reason then for us to note carefully the astounding familiarity of his relationship with God. We should remind ourselves to keep it in mind as we read other episodes where he does not let it be so apparent. Evidently, this relationship with God changed and deepened even beyond the level of intimacy described in his book. During his ashram years, Papa referred to this period, when Ramdas was wandering in the Himalayas several years ago. He used to converse with him. There was with him the impersonal person. He could commune with him. He could talk to him. But he went on to say, even now he does it, but very rarely. Because he is from within inspiring and guiding Ramdas every moment. As such, he is living and moving in a state of ecstasy and freedom. The ecstasy abides with him 24 hours without effort. We'll first read and then we'll come back again. It requires a lot of plumbing deep within. Reading such words, we might ask, what can all this mean to us, who are far from living on this level of constant liberated joy? For me at least, this book provides a compelling and inspiring example of what human beings can become. Perhaps not today or tomorrow, but Ramdas's vivid awareness of God points to more than his freedom. It tells us of our destiny. Equally important, it tells us of life and living, and more specifically, an enlightened attitude thereto. Sensitive readers of Ramdas's life will gain, much more than awesome reports of mystical visions or miracles, a lengthy immersion in the everyday life attitude of a God-realized saint as he travels amongst his fellow human beings. He notices their exasperating foibles. He allows their hostility to wash over them. He laughs with them, shares their joy, feels their sorrows. He meets to the extent he can their endless needs. All of this with a particular attitude. It is not exactly humility, because there is no ego to be humbled. It is detached, but in a way that includes the all-encompassing empathy of universal love. It is fearless, with a faith that bears unobtrusively the certain confidence that God's will is being done in all circumstances. When we read of the compassionate enlightenment of, say, the master yogis of the Himalayas or the Buddhas inhabiting transcendental realm, it is one thing. But when we have the opportunity to imbibe Ramdas's day-to-day perspective of life at length, as he journeys on the dusty roads of India, it is another. I find the remarkable quality of these stories is that I read them and then somehow carry something of Ramdas's attitude towards people and events into my own life. This indeed is a special grace. Its effect is particularly noticeable when I return to these pages after having neglected them for some time. The spiritual tone of my life takes a remarkable turn for the better. And I don't refer here to the specifically spiritual aspects of my life, meditation, worship and so on. Rather, it is the everyday interaction with persons and circumstances that is marvelously influenced. Consider one of the stories in the pages that follow. On the road to Kashmir, Ramdas had sought solitude for the night in a small, stone-walled basement room of a temple in Pathankot. Late in the evening, he was brought out by of meditation by the temple priest who had come with a few friends from the town. They brought a light and musical instruments, eagerly desiring to spend some happy hours in devotional singing in the blessed company of a visiting saint. Ram's will be done. Ramdas welcomed them, seeing them as embodiments of his beloved Ram. The music got underway but suddenly stopped. A virulently poisonous snake had entered the room. The visitors were horrified, fearing for their lives, seeing death itself approaching across the floor. Ramdas was unperturbed. In fact, he remained in semi-ecstasy. It was Ram's will that the snake had come. Indeed, the venomous visitor was none other than Ram himself, to be welcomed royally with offerings of sugar candy. When our solitude is impinged upon, are we able to see the divine hand at work? When confronted with threatening obstacles in our path, do we sense the visitation of God? Mostly I forget. I know a few more helpful antidotes to my forgetfulness than the words and examples of Papa Ramdas. As a child of God, Ramdas said to himself, he is freely moving about under his guidance and protection. He meets his beloved everywhere. You are all forms of his beloved. Why should he then feel himself a stranger anywhere? He is one with you. He is your eternal companion in the spirit. Papa Ramdas is also, I would add, a most precious friend. Yesterday we were reading Nobody's, that we should be always optimistic in our approach. We should never say, I'm getting old, I can't do this, like that, you remember. Success is hard to come by in temporal as well as in spiritual pursuits without one-pointedness of mind. If you could make your mind one-pointed, you will never be short of strength. Even if you are an old man of 60, you will have enthusiasm and strength of a young man. The mind should in fact go on getting stronger as one gets older. Look at the fruit. In the beginning of it is raw, then it ripens, then decays, but the seed within gets harder and harder. The shell deteriorates, falls off, but that is not the essential part of the fruit. Its essential part is the seed. Similarly, memory should go stronger, intellect should become sharper, more radiant. How to attain this? What should be done? Be always positive, There have been men in the past who have shown what great heights man can scale. Such men are there even now in our midst. Saints have shown what a man can achieve even while remaining caged within the body. If some men can do miraculous deeds while remaining within the body, why should it not be possible for me? Why should I set bounds to my imagination? I too possess the same human body, dwelling in which others have done heroic deeds. Then why should I be in such a sad plight? There must be something wrong with me. My mind is all the time focused on things outside. It is too preoccupied in finding faults in others. But why should I judge others? Why should I be concerned with the virtues and vices of others when I myself have them in abundance? If I remain busy in observing and criticizing the faults of others, how could I have concentration of mind? Then I am bound to be caught between rajas and tamas. The mind will either wander aimlessly or it will go to sleep. It will go blank. It is true that the Lord has given suggestion about sitting posture, but they could be useful only when one has realized the need of having one-pointedness of mind. So like that, So here, the professor, he is from the University of Santiago, this Nelson, Lance E. Nelson. He is beautifully brought out. See that during the days Ramdas lived more a settled life in Anandashram, he was asked why he no longer repeated Ram Nam, the holy name of God. After all, this was the spiritual practice that had lifted him to the heights of God realization. He responded, who is there to repeat it? He who used to repeat it has ceased to exist, having become one with Ram. Reflecting on the Himalayan journey described in the present volume, Ramdas described, he felt the oneness of the spirit everywhere, and there was nothing beside himself. Everything was a manifestation of his own self. So every now and then, suppose we go through the biographical sketches of masters like Papa. Suppose we have got a sagging morale, no? How can I do it? I am a samsari. I am bound to this, I am bound to that. Again, we get charged. It is possible. Within the boundaries, we can still possible. While he was seeing the divine self as pervading every particle of the universe, he experienced simultaneously that same infinite as a personal God, his beloved Ram, speaking to him, guiding him in an utterly personal way. This is the watcher-watcher relationship. No? Retaining the sense of individuality, the body, mind, intellect, equipment, which is limited, finite, which is conditioned, but still he was able to maintain a beautiful relationship. That is why probably in the quotation he said, the watcher is the real you, the self-immortal. Because we need not think that the sense of individuality or personality will be absent in that. No. He was able to maintain that relationship by communing with him, by talking to him. In his case, he had ample opportunities to do so in Kadri cave and in the Himalayan journey. If you remember right, once he says, let us see what he does now. He is putting Ram into task. Let Ramdas watch now how Ram is going to handle the situation. That sort of relationship which, that's why he used the word impersonal person. As a personal God, his beloved Ram, speaking to him, guiding him in an utterly personal way. Thus, we have in this book a most extraordinary play of non-dualism and devotion, Advaita and Bhakti, documented in a most intimate and authentic manner. Readers will be transfixed, for example, by a remarkable episode in Ramdas's Himalayan pilgrimage. Descending a mountain slope, a serious and imminent danger of losing his footing and plunging to his death, Ramdas carries on a conversation with Ram, who advises him at every step which way to go, which way not to go, so as to avoid disaster. Episodes like this, in which Ramdas reveals more directly the nature of his experience, are important. True, he describes this experience with an innocence, an understatement that may cause us to miss its significance. All the more reason then for us to note carefully the astounding familiarity of his relationship with God. It is not a dry relationship, We were prompted to read this, because when we were discussing about the watcher and the watched, it may lead us to dryness. But here, Papa has beautifully blended this, Yes, watcher is there, the watched is there. But there is a relationship. The watched maintains with the watcher. All the more reason then for us to note carefully. We should remind ourselves to keep it in mind. Evidently, this relationship with God changed and deepened even beyond the level of intimacy described. The next graduation stage. So Papa says, when Ramdas was wandering in the Himalayas several years ago, he used to converse with him. There was with him the impersonal person. He could commune with him. He could talk to him. Even now he does it, but very rarely. Because he is from within, inspiring and guiding Ramdas every moment. As such, he is living and moving in a state of ecstasy and freedom. The ecstasy abides with him 24 hours without effort. Reading such words, you might ask, what can all this mean to us, who are far from living on this level of constant liberated joy? For me at least, this book provides a compelling and inspiring example of what human beings can become. It is very important. Perhaps not today or tomorrow, but Ramdas's vivid awareness of God points to more than his freedom. It tells us of our destiny. Equally important, it tells us of life and living. And more specifically, an enlightened attitude thereto. That means in our workaday life, the whole attitude gets changed. It gets the stamp of this universality. Professor was able to pick these words, how it has influenced him. We may fail, we may forget, but this, when we deeply pondered over, it brings us back. Nothing from the individual standpoint. Everything should become from the universal standpoint. Equally important, it tells us of life and living. Actually, our living, our daily life. And more specifically, an enlightened attitude thereto. It is not exactly humility, because there is no ego to be humbled. It is detached, but in a way that includes the all-encompassing empathy of universal love. Detached from the individual level, but very much with the universal level. It is fearless, with a faith that bears unobtrusively the certain confidence that God's will is being done in all circumstances. When we read of the compassionate enlightenment of, say, the master yogis of the Himalayas or the Buddhas, it is one thing. But when we have the opportunity to imbibe Ramdas's day-to-day perspective on life at length, it is another. I find a remarkable quality of these stories is that I read them and then somehow carry something of Ramdas's attitude towards people and events into my own life. This is the message Papa gives through this. Not merely reading, not merely appreciating, not merely memorizing, but allowing them to percolate into my thought, word and deed so that the attitude is subjected to some sort of refinement. Process of refinement has started. When I deal with men and matters, how the norms. Previously it was purely from the individual level. Now when we apply our mind, we will know that it is not purely. We falter, we fail. But still there is an attempt on our part to view it from a universal level. This indeed is a special grace. Its effect is particularly noticeable when I return to these pages after having neglected them for some time. It has another message. When we read books like this, we may remember it as a narrative, whether it is in quest of God or in the vision of God. It's alright. Initially it will be like that. But again we go through, then we will slowly able to find so many such remarkable factors. And in our subconscious when we retain it, and then consciously or unconsciously when we apply this in our day-to-day life, and we get a thrill out of it. This is the tangible gain of reading it. This is what he realized. That's why he was able to write a beautiful foreword like this. It is not simply, that he has gone through it thoroughly, and it has touched his heart. The spiritual tone of my life takes a remarkable turn for the better. Spiritual tone of my life. I don't refer here to the specifically spiritual aspects of my life. Rather, it is everyday interaction with persons and circumstances that is marvelously influenced. Never it is viewed from the individual. Broadening, As Eckhart only says, you have to become larger than the thought. Thought is the one which limits, which puts a fence. So you have to become larger than it. Accommodating of it. He quotes that, when I'm a visitor, the virulent poisonous snake has entered. What was his reaction? So now is the test. When our solitude is impinged upon, are we able to see the divine hand at work? We are reading in a comfortable atmosphere, We are reading all this. Suppose a snake comes, we can see now. What will be our attitude? Everybody will be running here and there. Real test. When our solitude is impinged upon, are we able to see the divine hand at work? When confronted with threatening obstacles in our path, do we sense the visitation of God? Mostly I forget. But I know a few more helpful antidotes to my forgetfulness than the words and examples of Prabhupada. Finally, he caps this. As a child of God, Ramdas said, he is freely moving about under his guidance and protection. He meets his beloved everywhere. You are all forms of his beloved. Why should he then feel himself a stranger anywhere? He is one with you. He is your eternal companion in the spirit. Papa Ramdas is also, I would add, a most precious friend. Not sitting at the head of the institution, really moving with everybody. So why he prompted us to read was, for the past 2-3 days we have been trying to understand the watcher, how to experience the presence of the watcher in us, what all we have to employ, what is the method we have to pursue, all those things, we were going through. But still we should bear in mind that Papa's life, every now and then when we keep on reading it with that attitude, we will know that watcher and watched are interlinked, they are one. But at the same time, a state can come, just like Papa has said, where there is the watcher and the watched. And the watcher becomes aware of the watcher all the 24 hours. And he was able to maintain a relationship with the watcher also. By communing, by having dialogue. So this is something on which we should probe deeper and deeper and deeper. Then the whole thing, will not become dry. Impersonal person. Ram is an impersonal person, beyond which we cannot explain anything. But in our inside, we will be able to, because he was able to do that. Man. He was able to maintain that relationship, that impersonal. So this point, today when we came, what are we to talk? Suddenly he directs us to go to this particular forward and then place it before you, so that all of us can dwell on it. This is the ultimate. But it also requires withdrawal. Tomorrow we will try to do some more portion on this aspect. To develop this impersonal person, the relationship with this impersonal is very, very interesting. You must have that. And he also mentioned that he is an Advaitist, but he is a Bhakta. He is a Bhakta, but he is also an Advaitist. He was able to combine this, all these things should be in our mind. So the more we try to understand Papa through the form, how he was bringing out the formless aspect, the spirit, and how the spirit and the sense of individuality, lived in constant remembrance of the spirit. Please think over. It's a must for all of us in our journey toward the ultimate. Hari Om. Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Om. Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram Om. 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 Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. Hari Om to everybody. Hari Om, Hari Om. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om. Hari Om, Pranam.